I still remember the exact moment she said it, clear and cruel. "You don't deserve a room with a view." Those words shattered me, coming from my own daughter-in-law, in a rustic cabin nestled among endless pine trees outside Denver. My heart felt like it was breaking into a million icy shards. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. The morning started like any other in my small Brooklyn apartment on Flatbush Avenue. I woke before dawn, the city's distant hum already stirring beyond my thin walls. The smell of brewing coffee mixed with the stale air of years spent caring for others. My arthritic fingers wrapped around the ceramic mug that had been my companion for 15 years, the one with the faded roses that my late mother had given me. I stood by my kitchen window, looking down at the street where delivery trucks rumbled past and early commuters hurried toward the subway. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, showing a woman of 72 with silver hair I still tried to style each morning, wearing the same blue cardigan I'd owned for a decade. The routine was my anchor, but also my prison. Photographs lined my walls like silent witnesses to a life lived for others. Family portraits from happier times, wedding days filled with forced smiles, holidays we never had time to truly enjoy together. I used those pictures to remind myself what love was supposed to look like. But that particular morning, as I packed my suitcase for the family trip to Colorado, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was different. My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. A text from my son Michael: "Mom, make sure you bring the credit card. The cabin rental needs final payment." No good morning. No excitement about seeing me. Just another reminder that I was the family's financial solution to everything. I had paid for the entire trip. Every penny. The cabin rental for a week in the mountains outside Denver, the groceries, the activities for the grandchildren, even the gas money for their drive from New Jersey. Nearly $8,000 from my modest retirement savings. But I held on to hope like the warmest blanket. I expected gratitude, joy, reunion. The flight from JFK to Denver was turbulent, both in the air and in my mind. I pressed my face against the small airplane window, watching the landscape change from urban sprawl to endless plains, then to the dramatic rise of the Rocky Mountains. The elderly man next to me smiled and asked if I was visiting family. "Yes," I said, though the word felt heavy on my tongue. "My son and his family. We're having a reunion." He nodded approvingly. "Family is everything," he said. I wanted to believe him. The rental car was waiting at Denver International Airport, paid for by me, of course. The drive to the mountain cabin took 2 hours through winding roads lined with aspen trees just beginning to turn golden in the early September air. I had chosen this place carefully, researching for weeks to find something special for all of us. The website showed breathtaking views of the Continental Divide, cozy fireplaces, and rooms with large windows overlooking pristine wilderness. When I arrived at the cabin, the sun was setting behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that took my breath away. The building itself was everything I had hoped for: rustic logs and stone, with a wraparound porch and rocking chairs facing the mountains. I parked the car and grabbed my suitcase, excitement finally overcoming my anxiety. Michael came out to greet me, but his hug felt perfunctory, distracted. "Hey Mom, glad you made it. We've already settled in and assigned the rooms." His wife Sandra appeared behind him, her smile thin and calculating. She had always been beautiful in that sharp, polished way that made me feel dowdy and old-fashioned. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the mountain air, and her designer hiking clothes probably cost more than my monthly social security check. "Margaret," she said, using my full name instead of Mom like she had years ago, "we've given you the small room on the north side. It's perfectly adequate." She emphasized the word adequate like she was doing me a favor. I followed them inside, my suitcase wheels clicking across the hardwood floors. The main living area was stunning, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the mountain vista, a stone fireplace crackling with warmth, and comfortable leather furniture arranged for conversation. My grandchildren, Emma and Jake, were sprawled on the couch playing video games, barely looking up when I entered. "Grandma," called out Alice, my youngest granddaughter at 10 years old. She ran to me with genuine enthusiasm, wrapping her small arms around my waist. At least someone was happy to see me. Michael guided me down a narrow hallway to the back of the cabin. "Here's your room, Mom. It's nice and quiet back here." He opened the door to reveal a space that could generously be called a closet. A single bed, a tiny window overlooking the garbage bins and parking area, and barely enough room to open my suitcase. I stood in the doorway, my heart sinking. Through the main windows of the cabin, I could see the spectacular mountain views that had drawn me to this place. But from my assigned room, all I could see was concrete and pine needles. "This is fine," I said quietly, because that's what I always said. "This is perfectly fine." But it wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. That evening at dinner, which I had also paid for entirely, I sat at the end of the table while conversation swirled around me. Sandra dominated the discussion, talking about her latest real estate investments and the stock market portfolio she was building. She casually mentioned having moved some money into Bitcoin, laughing about how risky but exciting cryptocurrency could be. Money is just energy, she said, cutting her steak with precise movements. You have to make it work for you, not the other way around. She glanced at me meaningfully, as if I was somehow failing at this basic life principle. Michael nodded along eagerly, hanging on her every word about investments and returns. I remembered when he used to ask me for advice, when my opinion mattered. Now I was invisible, a wallet with legs who occasionally offered useful services. The grandchildren ate in silence, absorbed in their phones. Only Alice occasionally looked my way, offering small smiles that warmed my heart. She was the only one who seemed to see me as a person rather than a function. After dinner, I offered to clean up, as I always did. Sandra waved me away dismissively. We've got it handled, Margaret. Why don't you go rest? You look tired. The word stung because I was tired, bone-deep exhausted from years of giving everything and receiving crumbs in return. I retreated to my tiny room and sat on the narrow bed, watching through my small window as darkness settled over the mountains. In the main part of the cabin, I could hear laughter and conversation continuing without me. They didn't need me for anything except money, and even that they took for granted. That night, I lay awake listening to the sounds of the cabin settling and my family enjoying themselves in the rooms with views. I thought about all the times I had said yes when I wanted to say no, all the times I had given when I had nothing left to give, all the times I had smiled and said, "It's fine," when nothing was fine at all. Looking back now, I can see that trip wasn't the beginning of my problems with Michael and Sandra. It was just the moment when I could no longer pretend everything was normal. The pattern had been building for years, so gradually that I barely noticed it happening. It started after Michael married Sandra 8 years ago. She was ambitious, smart, and absolutely certain that she knew how the world worked. She had opinions about everything, from how I dressed to how I spent my money to how I related to my own grandchildren. Margaret needs to understand boundaries, I once overheard her telling Michael in their kitchen. I had come over to babysit the children, as I did every Friday night so they could have date nights. She can't just show up whenever she wants. But I didn't show up whenever I wanted. I showed up when they called, when they needed something, when there was a crisis or an opportunity, or simply when they wanted free childcare. The requests started small and reasonable. Could I help with the down payment on their house? Of course I could. I liquidated part of my retirement savings, money I had planned to use for travel or emergencies, and handed over $40,000 without expecting anything in return except maybe a bit of gratitude. "You're such a lifesaver, Mom," Michael had said, hugging me tight. "We'll pay you back as soon as the business takes off." The business was Sandra's idea, a boutique marketing consultancy that she ran from their home office. She had big dreams and bigger expenses, constantly talking about scaling up and leveraging their assets and maximizing their return on investment. She spoke in a language of money and ambition that made my simple retirement planning seem quaint and outdated. When the business needed operating capital, they came to me again. This time it was $25,000, my emergency fund that I had spent 30 years building. "It's just temporary," Sandra assured me, showing me spreadsheets and projections that meant nothing to me. "This is going to make us all wealthy. You'll get back triple what you invest." I gave them the money because I believed in Michael, because I wanted him to succeed, because I thought that's what mothers were supposed to do. But I never saw those investments pay dividends, never received the returns they promised, never even got acknowledgement that I was anything more than a convenient bank. The financial requests became routine. Help with the children's private school tuition. Emergency car repairs. Sandra's mother's medical bills when she fell ill, even though Sandra's family had far more assets than I did. Each time, I wrote the check or authorized the transfer, and each time, the gratitude lasted about as long as it took for the money to clear. "Mom, you're making too much fuss," Michael would say whenever I hesitantly asked about repayment or simply wanted acknowledgement of what I had given. "We're family. Family helps family." But help seemed to flow in only one direction. When my arthritis flared up badly last winter and I needed rides to doctor appointments, everyone was suddenly too busy. When I caught a respiratory infection that left me bedridden for a week, only Alice called to check on me. When my 80th birthday passed last year, I received a generic card in the mail 2 days late. I kept forgiving because I believed family was family, because I thought love meant sacrifice, because I was afraid that saying no would mean losing them entirely. But the repeated manipulation, the emotional blackmail disguised as need, started planting seeds of doubt that grew in the dark corners of my mind during long, lonely nights. Was I just a wallet with legs? A convenient source of labor and capital that they tolerated rather than loved? The questions haunted me, but I pushed them away because the alternative was too painful to consider. The mountain trip was supposed to be different. I had planned it carefully, choosing a destination that would bring us together, create new memories, give us a chance to reconnect as a family. I spent weeks researching the perfect cabin, reading reviews, making sure there would be activities for everyone. I sent excited emails about hiking trails and scenic drives, about the hot tub under the stars and the fireplace where we could roast marshmallows. Sandra's responses were brief and practical. Make sure there's Wi-Fi. I need to stay connected for work. No enthusiasm, no gratitude, just another demand disguised as necessity. But I held on to hope because hope was all I had left. I imagined us sitting together on that wraparound porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in brilliant colors. I pictured conversations that went deeper than logistics and obligations, laughter that included me instead of happening around me. The reality was so much worse than my fears. The second day of our mountain vacation, I woke early as usual, my internal clock still running on East Coast time. The cabin was quiet, everyone else still sleeping off the previous night's indulgences. I made coffee in the kitchen, grateful for a few moments of peace before the day's activities began. Through the main windows, the mountain view was spectacular in the morning light. Mist drifted between the peaks like ghosts, and the aspen trees shimmered gold and green in the early sunshine. It was exactly the kind of scene I had imagined when I booked this place, exactly the kind of beauty I had wanted to share with my family. I poured my coffee into a mug and stepped onto the porch, breathing in the crisp mountain air. For a moment, I felt something close to happiness. This was what I had paid for, what I had hoped would bring us together. Margaret, what are you doing out here so early? Sandra's voice cut through my quiet moment like a blade. She stood in the doorway behind me, already dressed in expensive activewear, her hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail. Just enjoying the sunrise, I said, turning to include her in the moment. Isn't it beautiful? She glanced at the view with the kind of casual indifference that wealth breeds, then focused her attention on me. We need to talk about today's plans. Michael and I want to take the children hiking to that waterfall you mentioned, but we think it might be too strenuous for someone your age. Someone my age. As if 72 was ancient, as if I was already in a wheelchair instead of someone who walked 3 miles every morning in Prospect Park. I think I can manage, I said carefully. I've been looking forward to it. Sandra's smile was sharp, predatory. Oh, I'm sure you think you can. But we can't risk you slowing everyone down or getting hurt up there. The altitude affects older people differently. Maybe you'd be more comfortable staying here, relaxing by the hot tub. The way she said older people made it sound like a disease, something contagious that might interfere with their perfect family activities. I felt the familiar sting of being dismissed, discounted, made to feel like a burden instead of a participant. It's my vacation too, I said quietly, more to myself than to her. Excuse me? Sandra's eyebrows rose in that expression of fake surprise that meant she had heard me perfectly well but wanted me to repeat myself, probably louder and with more emotion so she could dismiss me as being dramatic. Nothing, I said, because that's what I always said. I'll stay here. Make sure everything's ready for when you all get back. The triumph in her eyes was unmistakable, though she covered it quickly with false concern. That's probably for the best. Besides, someone needs to prep dinner. You're so much better at that domestic stuff than I am. Domestic stuff. As if cooking for 6 people was a hobby rather than unpaid labor, as if my decades of experience managing a household was some quaint skill rather than real work that she didn't want to do herself. The family left after breakfast, piling into the rental car that I had paid for, wearing hiking gear that I had helped purchase, carrying water bottles and snacks that I had prepared. Alice waved goodbye from the back window, the only one who seemed to realize I was being left behind. I spent the day alone in the cabin, cleaning up after people who didn't notice the mess they made, preparing an elaborate dinner for people who would barely thank me for it. The solitude wasn't peaceful, it was heavy with the weight of exclusion, thick with the realization that I was useful but not wanted. That evening, they returned sunburned and exhilarated, full of stories about the hike and the waterfall and the wildlife they had seen. They talked over each other, sharing photos on their phones, reliving the day's adventures while I set the table and served the meal I had spent hours preparing. You should have seen it, Grandma, Emma said, finally acknowledging my existence. The waterfall was huge. And we saw a family of deer. It sounds wonderful, I said, and I meant it. I wanted them to have those experiences, those memories. I just wished I could have shared them instead of being relegated to the role of support staff. After dinner, Michael suggested we sit on the porch and watch the sunset. Finally, I thought, a moment for all of us together. I settled into one of the rocking chairs, anticipating the kind of peaceful family time I had envisioned when planning this trip. But Sandra had other ideas. Actually, she said, directing her words to Michael while pointedly not looking at me, I want to talk to the kids about their college plans. Emma's sophomore year is crucial for her applications, and Jake needs to start thinking about his future. It was a reasonable topic, the kind of conversation families should have. But the way Sandra positioned herself, the way she angled the chairs, made it clear that this was a discussion for the immediate family only. I was not included in decisions about my own grandchildren's futures. I sat in my rocking chair feeling invisible while they talked about SAT prep and campus visits and trust funds for education expenses. Trust funds that would certainly not include contributions from grandma, despite the tens of thousands I had already given for their current schooling. The conversation drifted to Sandra's latest financial strategies, her investment portfolio that was apparently performing brilliantly despite the volatile market. She mentioned moving more money into technology stocks, diversifying into international markets, even putting some assets into gold as a hedge against inflation. The key is thinking long-term, she explained to the children, her voice taking on the tone of someone dispensing wisdom. Wealth isn't just about earning money, it's about making smart decisions with what you have. Building assets that generate passive income. Creating a foundation that will support generations. Michael nodded along enthusiastically, clearly impressed by his wife's financial acumen. The children listened politely, though I suspected they understood only half of what she was saying. I thought about my own financial situation, how much of my modest retirement savings I had already given to support their lifestyle and ambitions. My wealth wasn't measured in stock portfolios or cryptocurrency investments, it was measured in decades of careful saving, in sacrifices made so I could help my family when they needed it. But listening to Sandra talk, I felt naive and outdated, like someone whose understanding of money was hopelessly old-fashioned. She spoke of dollars and profits and returns with the confidence of someone who had never known real financial insecurity, never had to choose between medication and groceries, never spent sleepless nights worrying about outliving her savings. As the evening grew darker, the family began drifting toward their rooms. The children said goodnight with distracted kisses on my cheek, their minds already focused on tomorrow's activities. Michael squeezed my shoulder briefly, a gesture that felt more habitual than affectionate. Sandra paused at the porch door, looking back at me still sitting in my rocking chair, still hoping for a few more minutes of connection. That's when she said it. You know, Margaret, I've been thinking. This room situation isn't really working for anyone. The north bedroom is perfectly adequate for your needs. You don't really need all those windows and mountain views. After all, and here her smile turned razor sharp, you don't deserve a room with a view. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Not, you don't need, but, you don't deserve. As if my worthiness was something she got to determine, as if my value as a human being was less than theirs, as if the money I had spent to bring us all here meant nothing compared to her assessment of my place in the family hierarchy. I sat there in stunned silence while Sandra disappeared into the cabin, leaving me alone with the mountain darkness and the echo of her cruelty. The stars above were brilliant in the thin air, more beautiful than anything I had seen in years of city living. But I couldn't enjoy them anymore. All I could hear was her voice, you don't deserve a room with a view. That night, I lay awake in my tiny room, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what had happened. How had I gotten to this place where my own family treated me like hired help? When had love become transactional, measured in dollars given and services provided rather than in shared affection and respect? I thought about all the birthdays I had celebrated alone, all the holidays where I was included in the preparations but not the joy, all the times I had swallowed my hurt and smiled because I didn't want to cause problems. I thought about the $40,000 for their house, the $25,000 for Sandra's business, the countless smaller amounts that added up to a fortune I no longer had. But mostly I thought about Sandra's face when she delivered her verdict about what I deserved. There was no anger in it, no heat of argument or momentary spite. It was cold calculation, the assessment of someone who saw me clearly and found me wanting. The next morning, I woke before dawn again, but this time not from habit. I had barely slept, my mind spinning through decades of similar moments, smaller cruelties that I had dismissed or excused or simply endured. This mountain trip wasn't an aberration, it was the logical conclusion of years of being taken for granted. I made coffee in the dark kitchen and sat at the small table, watching the mountains emerge from shadow as the sun rose. The view from here was spectacular, everything I had hoped to share with my family. But I was alone with it, relegated to stolen moments while the people I loved slept in the rooms with the best vistas. As the family began to stir, I started breakfast as I always did. Pancakes from scratch, fresh fruit, bacon cooked exactly how everyone liked it. I set the table with care, arranged flowers I had picked from the front garden, put out the good syrup I had brought from home. They ate without conversation beyond logistics about the day's plans. Another hike, this time to an alpine lake that required an even longer drive and more strenuous walking. Again, it was assumed that I would stay behind, again I was assigned the role of caretaker rather than participant. But something had shifted in me during that sleepless night. The anger I had always swallowed was rising to the surface, hot and undeniable. The hurt I had always minimized was demanding recognition. The voice I had silenced for years was finding its strength. "I'd like to come today," I said quietly, interrupting their planning. Sandra looked at me with barely concealed irritation. "Margaret, we discussed this yesterday. The hiking would really be too much for someone with your limitations." My limitations. Not the limitations imposed by age or health, which I might have accepted, but limitations she was assigning to me based on her own assessment of my worth and capabilities. "I don't have any limitations that would prevent me from hiking," I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my chest. "I walk several miles every day at home. I think I can manage a mountain trail." Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly not wanting to be involved in this conflict. The children continued eating, pretending not to hear the tension building between the adults. Sandra's smile was patronizing, the kind reserved for difficult elderly relatives who needed to be managed rather than respected. "I'm sure you think you can. But we can't take responsibility if something happens to you up there. What if you fall? What if you can't keep up? We'd have to turn around and ruin everyone else's day." The implication was clear: I was a liability, a risk, a potential burden that would diminish everyone else's experience. My presence would ruin their day not because I was unpleasant company, but because I was simply too old and frail to belong in their world of adventure and vitality. "Then I'll take my own car," I said, surprising myself with my firmness. "I'll follow you there and hike at my own pace. If I can't keep up, I'll turn around and come back here." The silence that followed was thick with shock. I never pushed back, never made demands, never insisted on my own needs over their convenience. I was the accommodating one, the agreeable one, the one who made things easier for everyone else. Sandra's mask of false concern slipped for just a moment, revealing the calculation underneath. "That's not practical, Margaret. You don't know these mountain roads. What if you get lost? What if your car breaks down? We'd have to spend our vacation worrying about you instead of enjoying ourselves." Each objection was presented as concern for my welfare, but I could hear the real message beneath. Your presence is inconvenient, your needs are secondary, your desire to participate in your own vacation is unreasonable. "I have GPS," I said simply. "And a cell phone. And 40 years of driving experience." Michael finally spoke, his voice uncomfortable but decisive. "Mom, maybe Sandra's right. These mountain hikes can be really challenging. Why don't you stay here and relax? You paid for this beautiful cabin, you should enjoy it. Enjoy it alone. Enjoy the beauty and comfort I had purchased while they created memories I would never share. Enjoy my isolation while they bonded as a family unit that didn't include me." I looked around the table at these people I had loved and supported and sacrificed for, and I saw clearly for the first time what I meant to them. I was an ATM with legs, a convenient source of funding and services that they tolerated in exchange for occasional access to grandchildren and perfunctory holiday invitations. The realization hit me like a physical blow, but instead of breaking me, it crystallized something that had been building for years. I was done being convenient. I was done being grateful for scraps of affection. I was done pretending that being included on the margins was the same as being valued. "You're right," I said quietly, standing up from the table. "I should enjoy what I paid for." I walked away from the breakfast I had prepared, left them sitting around the table with their plans and their assumptions, and went to my tiny room to think about what I really wanted from this trip and from this family. For the first time in years, I was going to make a decision based on what I deserved rather than what everyone else needed from me. And what I deserved was so much more than a room without a view. That morning marked the beginning of my awakening, but the full realization of what I was dealing with came in smaller moments over the following days. Moments of casual cruelty that I had learned to ignore, dismissals that I had taught myself to accept, assumptions about my role that had become so ingrained that challenging them felt revolutionary. Like when Sandra complained about the coffee I had made being too weak, then made a fresh pot without offering to make one for me. Like when Michael asked me to do his laundry because, "You're better at that stuff, Mom," even though he was a 45-year-old man perfectly capable of washing his own clothes. Like when the grandchildren asked me to make them snacks while they played video games, then didn't look up when I brought the food to them. Each incident was small by itself, the kind of family dynamic that could be explained away as busy people taking advantage of available help. But together, they painted a picture of someone whose primary value was in what she could provide rather than who she was as a person. The breaking point came on the 4th day of our week-long vacation. I had been looking forward to this particular afternoon because the weather forecast promised clear skies perfect for the scenic drive I had researched months ago. The peak-to-peak highway was supposed to offer some of the most spectacular mountain views in Colorado, a route that would take us through historic mining towns and brilliant aspen groves. I had mentioned this drive in my planning emails, had printed out maps and information about stops along the way, had envisioned us all piled into the rental car together, sharing the kind of adventure that creates lasting memories. After lunch, I brought out the materials I had prepared, spreading maps and guidebooks across the dining table with the enthusiasm of someone who still believed in the possibility of connection. "I thought we could all do the scenic drive this afternoon," I said, trying to keep my voice light and inviting. "The aspens should be at peak color right now, and there are some historic sites that might interest everyone." Sandra barely glanced at the materials I had so carefully prepared. "Actually, Michael and I were planning to take the kids into Boulder for some shopping. There's an outlet mall that has some great stores." Shopping. Instead of experiencing the natural beauty that surrounded us, instead of sharing something meaningful together, they wanted to spend the afternoon in generic chain stores that existed in every city in America. "The drive would only take a few hours," I said, hearing the pleading note creep into my voice despite my efforts to sound casual. "We could stop at some of the mountain towns, maybe have dinner at that restored Victorian hotel I read about." The children looked up from their devices with mild interest, but Sandra's expression remained dismissive. "Margaret, not everyone wants to spend their vacation looking at old buildings and scenery. Some of us prefer activities that are actually engaging." Actually engaging. As if the mountains that had drawn people from around the world for more than a century were boring compared to outlet shopping. As if the beauty I had wanted to share with them was somehow inadequate entertainment for their refined tastes. Michael nodded agreement with his wife, as he always did. "Mom, the kids have been cooped up here for days. They need some civilization, some stimulation. Maybe you could stay here and hold down the fort while we go into town." Hold down the fort. Watch over the cabin I had rented while they escaped to enjoy themselves without me. Provide the unpaid security service that would let them shop with peace of mind, knowing their temporary home was being protected by someone who had nowhere else to go. "I could come with you," I said, hating myself for the hope I heard in my own voice. "I need a few things from the store anyway." The silence stretched uncomfortably. Sandra and Michael exchanged one of those married looks that communicated volumes without words. The children continued staring at their screens, pretending not to notice the tension. "The thing is," Sandra said finally, her voice taking on that fake sweetness that preceded her cruelest observations, "we were planning to make this an immediate family outing. You know, parents and children. Sometimes families need bonding time without outside interference." Outside interference. I was outside interference in my own family, an intrusion on their bonding rather than an integral part of their unit. I had paid for their vacation, prepared their meals, cleaned up after them, watched their belongings, and I was outside interference. The words hit me like a slap, but what hurt more was Michael's silence. He didn't correct his wife, didn't point out that I was his mother and therefore part of the immediate family, didn't suggest that including me might actually enhance their bonding rather than interfere with it. He just sat there, nodding slightly, apparently agreeing that I was an outsider who needed to be managed and excluded rather than a beloved family member whose company they valued. "Of course," I said quietly, because that's what I always said. "Of course. I understand." But I didn't understand. I didn't understand how love had become so conditional, how family had become so exclusive, how my own son could sit there and let his wife define me out of their inner circle. They left an hour later, piling into the car with excited chatter about stores and restaurants and entertainment options that sounded infinitely more appealing than spending time with me. I stood on the porch and watched them drive away, waving goodbye like the good sport I had trained myself to be. The silence they left behind was profound. Not just quiet, but empty, hollow with the weight of exclusion and the echo of casual cruelties. I walked back into the cabin and looked around at the evidence of their temporary residence: towels on bathroom floors, dishes in the sink, beds unmade, belongings scattered across surfaces without regard for the space or the person who would inevitably clean up after them. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, picking up their mess out of habit more than choice. In the main bedroom, the one with the spectacular mountain view that Michael and Sandra had claimed for themselves, I found myself standing at the window looking out at the scenery that had originally drawn me to this place. The afternoon light was perfect, golden and warm, turning the aspen leaves into coins of fire against the dark green pines. This was exactly the kind of moment I had envisioned sharing with my family, exactly the kind of beauty that had made me think a mountain vacation would bring us closer together. But I was experiencing it alone, relegated to stolen glimpses while the people I loved chose outlet shopping over natural wonder, retail therapy over connecting with each other and with me. That's when I saw it, sitting on Sandra's nightstand like an accusation, a small leather journal, slightly open, with handwriting visible on the exposed page. I'm not normally someone who reads other people's private thoughts, but something about the way it was positioned, almost as if it had been left for me to find, made me step closer. The entry was dated 3 days earlier, the day after Sandra had told me I didn't deserve a room with a view. "The mountain trip is going better than expected, though managing Margaret continues to be exhausting. She's so needy for attention and inclusion, constantly trying to insert herself into activities that would be more enjoyable without her. I think she genuinely believes she's entitled to participate in everything just because she paid for it, which shows how little she understands about family dynamics. Money can't buy you a place in the inner circle. Michael agrees that we need to establish clearer boundaries about her role in our lives. She's useful for financial support and childcare, but she doesn't understand that those services don't automatically grant her equal status with the actual family members. The sooner she accepts her position as support staff rather than participant, the easier these relationships will become for everyone. I'm hoping this trip will help her see reality more clearly. Maybe if we're consistent about limiting her involvement, she'll finally stop expecting to be treated like she matters as much as we do. I read those words 3 times before their full impact hit me. This wasn't accidental exclusion or temporary thoughtlessness. It was deliberate, calculated, strategic. Sandra had planned my marginalization, discussed it with my son, and viewed this vacation as an opportunity to train me into accepting a lesser role in my own family. She saw me clearly, more clearly than I had seen myself, and her assessment was devastating in its accuracy. I had been trying to buy love, trying to purchase meaning in connection through financial sacrifice and endless service. And they had let me, taking what I offered while making sure I understood it didn't earn me genuine inclusion. The journal entry continued with details about their shopping plans, references to trust funds and investment strategies, casual mentions of wealth and assets that made my modest contributions seem pathetic by comparison. Sandra wrote about money with the confidence of someone who had never worried about having enough, never sacrificed her security for someone else's dreams. But what struck me most wasn't her financial confidence. It was her casual dismissal of my humanity, her clinical analysis of how to manage me like a difficult employee rather than embrace me like a family member. I was a problem to be solved, a boundary to be established, a service provider to be kept in her proper place. I sat down on their bed, surrounded by the mountain view I wasn't supposed to need, holding the journal that revealed what my family really thought of me. The betrayal was complete, but strangely, it was also liberating. For years, I had wondered if I was being too sensitive, too demanding, too needy in my expectations of love and respect. Sandra's words confirmed that the problem wasn't my perception, the problem was their assessment of my worth. I hadn't been imagining the exclusion, I had been systematically excluded. I hadn't been paranoid about being used, I had been deliberately used. But I had also been complicit in my own diminishment, accepting less than I deserved because I was afraid that demanding more would mean losing what little I had. I had trained them to treat me as support staff by never insisting on being treated as family. That afternoon, alone in the cabin with only my own reflection for company, I made a decision that would change everything. I was done being grateful for scraps. I was done accepting exclusion disguised as family dynamics. I was done believing that my value was measured in dollars given rather than love received. I was going to become someone who deserved a room with a view, and I was going to stop settling for anything less. The first step was surprisingly simple, I stopped cleaning up after them. When they returned from Boulder that evening, loaded with shopping bags and stories about their wonderful day, they found the cabin exactly as they had left it. Towels still on the bathroom floors, dishes still in the sink, bed still unmade. The dinner preparations I usually had waiting were nowhere to be seen. "Mom, what's for dinner?" Michael asked, dropping his purchases on the couch and looking around expectantly. "I don't know," I said calmly, looking up from the book I was reading by the fireplace. "What are you planning to make?" The silence was profound. In nearly 50 years of being Michael's mother, I had never answered that question with another question. I had always had a plan, a meal in progress, a solution to the family's needs that didn't require them to think or contribute. Sandra appeared from the bedroom, having changed into evening clothes that probably cost more than my monthly budget. "Margaret, we've been out all afternoon. We assumed you'd have dinner started by now." "I've been relaxing," I said simply. "Enjoying the cabin I rented. Reading by the fireplace. Having a lovely, peaceful day." The words were polite, even pleasant, but their implication was revolutionary. I hadn't spent the day preparing for their return, hadn't organized my time around their needs and expectations, hadn't automatically assumed that their comfort was my responsibility. Michael looked confused, as if I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. "But Mom, someone needs to cook." "Absolutely," I agreed cheerfully. "Someone does need to cook. There are groceries in the kitchen that I purchased. I'm sure you'll figure something out." I returned to my book, a novel about a woman who left her entire life behind to travel solo around the world. The symbolism wasn't lost on me, even if it was lost on my family. They eventually cobbled together a meal of sandwiches and chips, grumbling about the lack of planning and the inconvenience of having to fend for themselves. The children complained that the food wasn't as good as Grandma's cooking, which might have softened my resolve before, but now only confirmed that they valued me for my services rather than my presence. During dinner, Sandra tried to regain control of the situation through passive-aggressive commentary disguised as concern. I hope you're feeling well, Margaret. It's so unlike you to not have everything organized. Are you sure you're not coming down with something? It was a masterful manipulation, implying that my new behavior was a sign of illness rather than choice, that my normal pattern of endless service was so natural that any deviation must indicate a problem. I'm feeling wonderful, I said truthfully. Clear-headed and energetic. I spent the afternoon thinking about what I really want from this vacation, and I realized I've been approaching it all wrong. Michael leaned forward, probably hoping I was about to return to my familiar role as family facilitator. What do you mean, Mom? I mean, I've been so focused on taking care of everyone else that I forgot to take care of myself. This is supposed to be my vacation too, but I've been treating it like a work assignment. From now on, I'm going to participate instead of just serve. The implications of this statement hung in the air like smoke from the fireplace. Sandra's eyes narrowed as she calculated what my new attitude might mean for their remaining days at the cabin. That's wonderful, Margaret, she said with false brightness. Self-care is so important at your age. But you do understand that we all have certain expectations for how this week would go. We've planned activities around your usual contributions. Contributions. Such a polite word for unpaid labor, such a diplomatic way to describe the assumption that I would cook and clean and organize while they enjoyed themselves. Then you'll need to adjust your expectations, I said calmly. Or make different plans. I'm going to spend tomorrow doing what I want to do, and I invite all of you to join me if you're interested. Alice, my youngest granddaughter, looked up from her plate with genuine curiosity. What do you want to do, Grandma? Finally, someone had asked me what I wanted instead of telling me what they needed from me. The question itself was like a small gift, acknowledgement that my preferences mattered. I want to take that scenic drive I mentioned earlier, I said, smiling at Alice with real warmth. I want to see the aspen trees and visit those historic mining towns. I want to have lunch at that Victorian hotel and maybe browse through some antique shops. I want to experience the places I researched instead of just reading about them. That sounds fun, Alice said with the genuine enthusiasm that only children possess. Can I come with you? Before I could answer, Sandra intervened with the smooth authority she used to manage situations that threatened her control. Actually, sweetie, we have other plans tomorrow. Remember? We talked about going back into Denver to see the art museum. It was news to me, and probably to Alice, but Sandra delivered it with the confidence of someone whose word was final. The adults had decided, regardless of what the child or the grandmother might prefer. But this time, I didn't automatically defer to their authority. Alice, you're welcome to come with me if you'd like. We could make it a grandmother-granddaughter adventure. I looked directly at Sandra as I spoke, making it clear that I was extending the invitation regardless of her plans. Sometimes it's nice to have options. The power struggle was subtle but unmistakable. Sandra had been accustomed to controlling family activities through her relationship with Michael, but I was offering Alice a direct alternative that bypassed parental authority. Michael shifted uncomfortably, caught between his wife's expectations and his mother's unprecedented assertiveness. Mom, let's not make this complicated. We should stick to plans we've already made. Plans you made without consulting me, I pointed out mildly. Plans that assume I'll be available to watch the cabin while you explore the places I wanted to visit. The truth of this statement was undeniable, and the silence that followed was heavy with recognition. They had made their plans around my exclusion, had organized their activities to minimize my participation while maximizing my usefulness. It's not personal, Margaret, Sandra said, though we both knew it was deeply personal. It's just practical. We have different energy levels, different interests. It makes sense to split up sometimes. Of course it does, I agreed pleasantly. That's exactly what I'm doing. Following my own interests at my own energy level. Starting tomorrow. I excused myself from dinner before they could mount further objections, leaving them to clean up their own dishes for the first time since we'd arrived. In my tiny room, I sat on the narrow bed and planned my first day of actual vacation, my first day of prioritizing my own desires over their expectations. The mountain view from the main windows was spectacular in the evening light, but for the first time since arriving, I wasn't bitter about not having access to it. Tomorrow, I would drive through mountains even more beautiful, would see vistas that no one could assign or withhold, would choose my own adventures instead of waiting for permission to participate in theirs. I fell asleep that night with something I hadn't felt in years, anticipation for tomorrow based on my own choices rather than anxiety about managing everyone else's needs. The next morning, I woke before dawn with a sense of purpose that felt foreign and exciting. I dressed carefully in my favorite traveling clothes, packed a small bag with water and snacks, and made coffee for myself without starting the elaborate breakfast production that usually marked the beginning of each day. The family was still sleeping when I wrote a simple note and left it on the kitchen counter, gone exploring. Back this evening. Have a wonderful day. No detailed itinerary, no emergency contact information, no anxious list of instructions about the cabin's care. Just a straightforward announcement of my independent plans. I drove away from the cabin as the sun was rising over the peaks, feeling something I recognized from decades past but had almost forgotten, the joy of adventure undertaken by choice rather than obligation. The scenic drive was everything I had hoped it would be. The aspen trees were at peak color, turning entire mountainsides into tapestries of golden orange and red. The mining towns were charming with their Victorian architecture and authentic frontier history. The mountain views were spectacular, changing with every curve in the road, offering new perspectives on wilderness beauty. At the historic hotel where I had planned to bring the whole family, I had lunch alone at a table by the window, watching tourists and locals move through the lobby with the comfortable anonymity of someone whose time belonged entirely to herself. The food was delicious, the service was attentive, and for the first time in years, I wasn't focused on anyone's needs but my own. In the antique shops, I browsed without purpose or deadline, examining old photographs and vintage jewelry and books that reminded me of my own childhood. I bought myself a small ceramic vase shaped like a mountain peak, something beautiful and unnecessary that marked this day as mine alone. The drive back to the cabin took longer than necessary because I kept stopping to admire views, to take photographs with my phone, to simply stand in the mountain air and breathe without rushing towards someone else's schedule. I returned to the cabin as the sun was setting, feeling refreshed and renewed in a way I hadn't experienced in decades. The family was gathered in the main room, clearly waiting for my return with a mixture of curiosity and irritation. "Where were you all day?" Michael asked immediately, as if my absence had been an emergency rather than a choice. "I told you in my note. I went exploring." I showed them the photographs on my phone, the evidence of a day well spent in places they had dismissed as uninteresting. The aspens were incredible. "You really should see them before we leave." Sandra's smile was tight with barely controlled frustration. "We were worried about you, Margaret. You've never just disappeared like that before." Worried. As if my independent activity was cause for concern rather than celebration, as if my ability to navigate a day alone was questionable rather than admirable. "I wasn't worried about me," I said cheerfully. "I had a wonderful time." "How was the art museum?" The silence that followed revealed that they hadn't actually gone to Denver, hadn't pursued the cultural activity that had been so important it prevented Alice from joining my scenic drive. They had spent the day at the cabin, probably expecting my early return, probably planning discussions about my uncharacteristic behavior. Alice broke the silence with typical childhood directness. "We didn't go anywhere. Mom said we should wait to see what you wanted to do." Sandra's flush of embarrassment was visible even in the firelight. She had used Alice as an excuse to prevent my granddaughter from joining me, but hadn't followed through on the alternative plans she had presented as so compelling. "We had a relaxing day here," Michael said quickly, trying to cover for his wife's obvious fabrication. "Sometimes it's nice to just enjoy the cabin." "It is," I agreed. "That's why I booked it. Though I have to say, combining cabin relaxation with scenic exploration makes for a perfect day. We should all plan something like that together before we leave." The suggestion was reasonable, even generous, considering how they had excluded me from their previous adventures. But Sandra's response revealed how much my new independence threatened her control over family dynamics. "Actually, Margaret, we've been talking, and we think it might be better if we cut the vacation short. Michael has some work issues that need his attention, and the children are getting restless being away from their friends." It was a masterful manipulation, presented as a family decision made for practical reasons rather than a punishment for my refusal to stay in my assigned role. They were prepared to sacrifice their own vacation rather than adjust to my new expectations of inclusion and respect. But this time, their threat didn't frighten me into compliance. "That's fine with you," I said calmly. "The cabin is paid for through the weekend, so I'll stay and enjoy it whether you're here or not. In fact, I might extend my trip if I'm having a good time." The idea that I might choose to vacation alone, that I might prefer my own company to their conditional acceptance, was clearly something they hadn't anticipated. Sandra looked genuinely shocked, as if the possibility that I could be happy without them had never occurred to her. Michael tried a different approach, one that acknowledged my new assertiveness while trying to guide it back toward their comfort zone. "Mom, we appreciate that you want to be more independent, but we're still family. We should be doing things together, not separately." "I agree completely," I said with enthusiasm. "That's exactly what I've been trying to do all week. I've invited you to join my activities, just like you've invited me to join yours. The difference is, when you say no to my invitations, I accept your choice gracefully. When I say no to yours, you tell me I'm being difficult." The truth of this observation was uncomfortable but undeniable. I had been gracious about exclusion while they were demanding about inclusion, accepting their rejections while expecting my automatic compliance. Alice, bless her, cut through the adult complexity with childish wisdom. "Why can't we all do what Grandma wants to do? She paid for everything, so shouldn't she get to choose?" From the mouths of babes. My 10-year-old granddaughter understood fairness better than the adults who had spent the week taking my contributions for granted while dismissing my preferences as unimportant. Sandra's response was swift and revealing. Alice, families don't work that way. Just because someone pays for something doesn't mean they get to control everyone else's behavior. There has to be compromise and consideration for what everyone wants. Compromise and consideration. Exactly what I had been asking for all week, exactly what they had been refusing to offer while expecting unlimited accommodation of their own preferences. You're absolutely right, I said to Sandra with genuine agreement. There should be compromise and consideration all around. I'm glad we finally agree on that principle. The evening continued with strained conversation and careful politeness, but the fundamental dynamics had shifted. I was no longer the accommodating servant who absorbed their demands without making any of my own. I had become someone with preferences and boundaries, someone who expected reciprocity rather than accepting one-sided giving. The next day, when they announced their decision to leave early, I helped them pack with the same cheerful efficiency I had always provided. But when they assumed I would be leaving with them, I clarified my position without apology. I'm staying for the full week I planned and paid for. The mountains are beautiful this time of year, and I haven't finished exploring them yet. Michael looked genuinely concerned, as if my desire to complete my own vacation was evidence of some concerning decline. Mom, are you sure you'll be okay here alone? What if something happens? The same thing that would happen if I were alone in Brooklyn, I said reasonably. I'll handle it. I've been taking care of myself for 72 years, I think I can manage a few more days in a mountain cabin. As they packed their belongings and prepared to leave, Alice lingered in the main room, clearly reluctant to abandon me to my solitary vacation. I wish I could stay with you, Grandma, she said, her 10-year-old face serious with genuine regret. Maybe next time, I said, hugging her tightly. Maybe next time we'll plan a grandmother-granddaughter adventure from the beginning. Sandra overheard this exchange and moved quickly to prevent any future plans that excluded her control. We'll have to see about next time, she said firmly. There are a lot of factors to consider when planning family trips. Of course there are, I agreed pleasantly. Starting with who's paying for them. The implied threat was mild but unmistakable. My financial support had always come with the assumption that I would be grateful for whatever inclusion was offered. But gratitude could work in reverse, they could be grateful for my generosity instead of treating it as their due. They left in a flurry of last-minute packing and hurried goodbyes, clearly uncomfortable with leaving me but unable to stay without acknowledging my right to equal participation in our family dynamics. I stood on the cabin porch and waved as they drove away, feeling not abandoned but liberated. For the first time in the week since our vacation began, I had the cabin to myself by choice rather than exclusion. The rooms with views were mine to enjoy, the schedule was mine to determine, the activities were mine to choose. I was alone but not lonely, independent but not isolated. I spent the remaining days hiking trails they had deemed too challenging for me, visiting towns they had found too boring, taking photographs of scenery they had dismissed as uninteresting. I read books by the fireplace, took long baths in the jetted tub, cooked meals I enjoyed instead of foods designed to please others. On my last evening at the cabin, I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in brilliant colors, sipping wine from a glass I had bought at one of the antique shops. The beauty surrounded me like a benediction, and for the first time in years, I felt complete in my own company. The vacation I had planned as a family reunion had become something entirely different, a personal retreat that reminded me who I was beyond my roles as mother, grandmother, and financial provider. I was someone who deserved beautiful views and meaningful experiences, someone whose preferences mattered, someone whose company was valuable even when that company was my own. When I returned to Brooklyn, I was different in ways that weren't immediately visible but were profoundly real. I had remembered what it felt like to choose against what to please others, to prioritize my own needs without feeling guilty about the decision. The family, meanwhile, returned to their assumptions that our mountain trip had been an aberration, a temporary disruption that would resolve itself once normal family patterns reasserted themselves. They were wrong. The first test came 2 weeks after our return, when Sandra called with a request that would previously have been phrased as an assumption. Margaret, we need you to watch the children this Saturday night. Michael's company is having their annual gala, and this is really important for his career advancement. In the old pattern, I would have automatically said yes, rearranging my own plans to accommodate their needs without question. But the mountain trip had taught me that my time had value beyond its convenience to others. I'm not available Saturday night, I said simply. The silence on the phone was profound, as if Sandra couldn't quite process my refusal to provide the service she had requested. What do you mean, not available? What do you have planned that's more important than helping your own family? The loaded question revealed her continued assumption that my activities were automatically secondary to theirs, that any plans I might have were obviously less significant than their needs. I have plans, I said without elaborating. I didn't owe her a detailed justification of how I chose to spend my time, didn't need to prove that my Saturday night preferences were worthy of respect. Well, can't you change them? This gala is really important for Michael's career. There will be senior partners there, potential clients. This could affect his entire future with the firm. The escalation was familiar, my importance of personal time versus the critical nature of their needs, my selfishness versus their legitimate family obligations, my unreasonable inflexibility versus their understandable requirements for my service. But the mountain trip had taught me to recognize manipulation disguised as crisis, to understand that urgent need often meant poor planning rather than genuine emergency. I'm sure you'll figure out alternative childcare arrangements, I said pleasantly. There are several babysitting services in your area, or maybe Sandra's mother could help. The suggestion that they might pay for services I had always provided for free, or turn to her family for support instead of mine, was apparently revolutionary. Margaret, Sandra's mother, lives 3 hours away. And babysitters cost money. We were counting on you. Counting on me. Taking my availability for granted, assuming my compliance without requesting it, building their plans around my unpaid labor without acknowledging that labor is valuable or voluntary. I understand that changes your plans, I said with genuine sympathy but firm resolve. That's unfortunate, but it doesn't change my decision. The conversation ended with Sandra's barely controlled frustration and my entirely controlled satisfaction. For the first time in decades, I had said no to a family request without feeling guilty, without apologizing, without offering alternative sacrifices to make up for my unavailability. I spent that Saturday night at a community theater production in my neighborhood, enjoying a romantic comedy performed by talented local actors. The ticket cost $12, the wine during intermission cost $8 more, and the experience of choosing my own entertainment over family obligation was priceless. Monday morning brought a phone call from Michael, clearly designated as the family negotiator sent to restore previous arrangements. Mom, Sandra told me about Saturday night. I have to say, I was pretty surprised that you wouldn't help us out when we needed you. The disappointment in his voice was calculated to trigger my maternal guilt, to remind me that good mothers sacrifice their own preferences for their children's success. I was surprised too, I said cheerfully. Surprised that you assumed I would be available without asking, surprised that you didn't have a backup plan for childcare, surprised that you called Sunday morning to express disappointment rather than ask how my evening went. Michael paused, clearly not prepared for my analysis of the situation rather than my apology for causing problems. How did your evening go? He asked, probably hoping I had spent it miserably regretting my refusal to help. Wonderfully. I saw a delightful play, had interesting conversations with other theatergoers, and got home at a reasonable hour feeling entertained and refreshed. How was your gala? It was fine. We found a babysitter through an app. She was expensive and the kids didn't know her, but it worked out. The subtext was clear: your absence caused problems, cost money, created complications that could have been avoided if you had simply done your job as unpaid family support staff. I'm glad it worked out, I said sincerely. It's good to know you have options when I'm not available. The conversation continued with Michael's careful probing about my new attitude, his attempts to understand what had changed and whether it was permanent or temporary. I didn't offer explanations or justifications, didn't apologize for prioritizing my own preferences or promise to return to my previous availability. I simply acknowledged that yes, things were different now, and yes, the difference was intentional and likely permanent. Over the following weeks, similar requests came with similar results. Could I loan them money for Sandra's latest business expansion? No, my investment priorities had changed. Could I host Thanksgiving dinner as usual? No, I was planning to travel that week. Could I provide emergency childcare when their regular babysitter was sick? No, I had other commitments. Each refusal was met with shock, disappointment, and increasingly desperate attempts to restore the previous dynamic where my resources and services were available on demand. Each refusal strengthened my resolve and clarified my understanding of what our relationship had become versus what I wanted it to be. The breaking point came in early December, when Sandra made a request that revealed just how completely she had misunderstood the changes in our family dynamics. She called on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice bright with the assumption that this request would surely be acceptable where others had been refused. Margaret, I have wonderful news. Michael's been offered a promotion that would require us to relocate to the Seattle office. It's a huge opportunity, a significant salary increase, and real advancement potential. I congratulated her sincerely, recognizing that Michael's career success was genuinely good news regardless of my complicated feelings about our family relationships. The thing is, Sandra continued, the move would happen pretty quickly, probably after the first of the year. And with the cost of relocating and buying a new house, we're going to need some financial help to make it work. Financial help. Another euphemism for my money, another assumption that my assets were available to fund their lifestyle improvements, another expectation that I would sacrifice my security for their advancement. How much financial help? I asked, though the amount was less significant than the assumption that such help would automatically be provided. Well, the down payment on a Seattle house in a good neighborhood is going to be substantial. And there are moving costs, temporary housing, all the expenses that come with a major relocation. We were thinking maybe $100,000? As a loan, of course, though the repayment terms would need to be flexible given all the adjustments we'll be making. $100,000. My entire remaining retirement savings, the nest egg I had spent 40 years building and had already significantly depleted through previous family loans that had never been repaid. The request was delivered with such confidence, such certainty that I would want to enable their success, that Sandra was clearly unprepared for any response other than grateful enthusiasm for the opportunity to contribute to their advancement. No, I said quietly. No. Sandra's voice rose with genuine shock, as if she had misheard my response. No. I won't be providing financial assistance for your relocation. The silence that followed was heavy with disbelief. In Sandra's worldview, my refusal to fund their opportunities was incomprehensible, possibly even cruel. Margaret, I don't think you understand what this promotion means for Michael's career. This is the chance he's been working toward for years. With your help, we could set up our family's future for generations. Generations. As if my sacrifice would somehow benefit descendants I would never see, as if impoverishing myself in my 70s was an investment in their long-term prosperity. I understand that it's an important opportunity, I said patiently. I also understand that it's your opportunity, not mine. I won't be funding your relocation. Sandra's response revealed the true nature of her expectations and the depth of her entitlement. But Margaret, you don't have anyone else to leave your money to. Alice and Jake and Emma are your grandchildren, this would be for their benefit too. What else are you going to do with your savings? What else was I going to do with my savings? As if my money existed primarily for their benefit, as if my financial security in my remaining years was less important than their advancement opportunities, as if I had no right to preserve my assets for my own needs and choices. I'm going to do whatever I choose to do with my savings, I said firmly. Including keeping them for my own use. The conversation continued with increasingly desperate arguments about family loyalty and missed opportunities and the selfishness of my refusal to help. Sandra reminded me of all the previous financial assistance I had provided, as if those gifts created an obligation for future gifts, as if generosity was a trap that required endless repetition. But the mountain trip had taught me that generosity without boundaries was not love, it was exploitation disguised as family duty. I had the right to be generous when I chose, on terms I determined, for reasons that made sense to me rather than reasons that served others. The call ended with Sandra's barely controlled anger and my calm but final refusal. Within hours, Michael called to continue the negotiation, this time focusing on emotional rather than financial arguments. Mom, I'm really disappointed that you won't help us with this opportunity. After everything Sandra and I have done for you, after all the ways we've included you in our family life, I expected more support when we really needed it. Everything they had done for me. The phrase was so inaccurate it was almost funny. They had provided me with opportunities to serve them, chances to give them money, invitations to participate on their terms in activities they found convenient. What exactly have you done for me? I asked with genuine curiosity. The question caught Michael off guard, as if the answer was so obvious it didn't need articulation. Well, we include you in family activities. We invite you to spend time with the grandchildren. We let you be part of our lives. Let me be part of their lives. As if my presence was a privilege they granted rather than a relationship we shared, as if access to my own grandchildren was a favor they dispensed rather than a natural bond they facilitated or hindered. Michael, do you hear what you're saying? You let me be part of your life? You include me in activities that I pay for? You invite me to spend time with my own grandchildren? The silence that followed was profound, as if Michael was hearing his words for the first time and recognizing their implications. I didn't mean it like that, Mom. How did you mean it? Another long pause. I meant that we care about you. That you're important to us. How am I important to you? Specifically? The questions were not rhetorical. I genuinely wanted to understand how my son perceived my role in his life beyond my financial contributions and domestic services. You're my mother, he said finally, as if that relationship was self-evidently meaningful. Yes, I am. And what does that mean to you? How do you show that you value me as your mother rather than just as a source of money and babysitting? The questions hung in the air without answer because, I was beginning to realize, there was no answer. My value to them was entirely functional, entirely based on what I could provide rather than who I was. The conversation ended without resolution and without agreement. Michael was confused by my questions and hurt by my refusal. I was sad but determined about my boundaries and clear about my priorities. That evening, I sat in my Brooklyn apartment looking through the photographs I had taken during my solo days at the mountain cabin. The images reminded me of what it felt like to prioritize my own joy, to value my own preferences, to spend money on my own experiences rather than other people's opportunities. I made a decision that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. I was going to take a real vacation, completely alone, somewhere I had always wanted to go but had never prioritized because family needs always came first. I was going to take that train trip across the country, the one I had dreamed about for years but dismissed as too expensive, too self-indulgent, too frivolous for someone whose money was better spent on other people's necessities. The next morning, I called Amtrak and booked a roomette on the California Zephyr from Chicago to San Francisco, with a stop in Denver to see those mountains again from a different perspective. The trip would take 3 days each way, with a week in California visiting a college friend I hadn't seen in 15 years. The total cost was nearly $4,000, money I would previously have felt guilty spending on myself when family members had needs I could help meet. But the mountain trip had taught me that my needs mattered too, that my dreams had value, that my happiness was worth pursuing even when it didn't benefit anyone else. 2 days after booking the train trip, Sandra called with what she clearly expected to be a compelling final argument for funding their relocation. "Margaret, I wanted you to know that we've had to turn down Michael's promotion. Without the financial assistance we were counting on, we simply can't make the move work. Michael is devastated. This was his chance for real advancement, and now he'll probably never get another opportunity like this." The emotional manipulation was sophisticated. My selfish refusal had not only hurt them but destroyed Michael's career prospects, probably permanently. Their failure to secure my funding had resulted in missed opportunities that would affect their entire future. But I had learned to recognize manufactured crises, artificial urgency designed to pressure me into immediate compliance with their preferences. "That's unfortunate," I said with genuine sympathy but no guilt. "There will be other opportunities." "You don't understand," Sandra said, her voice rising with frustration. "This was the opportunity. Michael has worked for this promotion for 5 years. The next opening at his level won't come for another 3 or 4 years, if ever." The implication was clear. My refusal to sacrifice my financial security for their advancement was not just mean-spirited but short-sighted, destroying opportunities that would have benefited everyone. "Sandra, if this promotion was so important, why didn't you plan for the moving expenses instead of assuming I would pay for them?" The question was reasonable but apparently unexpected, as if the idea that they should fund their own opportunities was revolutionary. "We did plan," Sandra said defensively. "But Seattle real estate is more expensive than we anticipated, and the company isn't offering as much relocation assistance as we hoped. We needed help with the shortfall." "Then maybe the timing isn't right for this move," I suggested mildly. "Maybe you should wait until you've saved enough money to relocate without depending on loans from family." The concept that they should delay their gratification until they could afford it themselves, without external financial support, was clearly foreign to Sandra's way of thinking. "Easy for you to say," she snapped, her frustration finally erupting into direct criticism. "You don't have career pressures or family responsibilities. You don't understand what it's like to have opportunities that require immediate decisions." Easy for me to say. As if my 72 years had been devoid of difficult choices and career pressures, as if my decisions had always been simple because my life had been uncomplicated. I thought about the opportunities one had sacrificed to raise Michael as a single mother, the career advancement I had foregone to be available for his school events and childhood illnesses, the financial security I had compromised to help him through college and his early adult struggles. But I didn't recite those sacrifices because they weren't debts he owed me, they were choices I had made out of love. The difference was that my sacrifices had been acknowledged and appreciated, while theirs were expected and taken for granted. "You're right," I said quietly. "I don't understand your pressures. Just like you don't understand mine." "What pressures do you have?" Sandra asked with barely concealed scorn. "You're retired. You have no mortgage, no children to support, no career to manage. What could possibly be stressing you?" The question revealed how completely she misunderstood the challenges of aging, the fears that came with fixed income and declining health, the reality of trying to preserve resources that might need to last for decades of uncertain needs. "I have the pressure of making sure I don't outlive my money," I said simply. "I have the pressure of maintaining my independence as long as possible. I have the pressure of making choices about how to spend my remaining years without knowing how many years I have left." These were not dramatic problems, not crises that required immediate intervention, but they were real concerns that shaped my decisions about money and time and priorities. "But you have so much money just sitting in the bank," Sandra continued, as if saving money was somehow wasteful rather than prudent. "You could help us and still have plenty left over." So much money. My modest retirement savings, accumulated through decades of careful living and conservative saving, seemed vast to someone who had always been able to earn more when they needed it. I have enough money to maintain my current lifestyle if I'm careful with it, I corrected. I don't have enough money to fund other people's lifestyle improvements and maintain my own security. The conversation ended with Sandra's angry assertion that I was being selfish and short-sighted, that I was prioritizing money over family, that I would regret my decision when I realized how much my refusal had hurt the people who cared about me. But I didn't feel selfish, I felt self-protective. I didn't feel like I was prioritizing money over family. I felt like I was finally recognizing that family relationships based primarily on financial transactions weren't healthy for anyone involved. A week before my train trip, Alice called me directly, something she had never done before. Her voice was small but determined, the way children sound when they're trying to be brave about something that scares them. "Grandma, Mom said you're going on a trip by yourself. She said you don't want to spend time with family anymore." The pain in her 10-year-old voice was genuine, and it cut straight to my heart. Of all the family members, Alice was the only one who had consistently shown me affection without expecting anything in return, who had defended my right to scenic views and family inclusion. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, settling into my favorite chair and giving Alice my full attention. "I'm going on a trip because I want to see some places I've never seen before. It has nothing to do with not wanting to spend time with you. But Mom said you won't help our family anymore because you're mad at us." Sandra's interpretation of my new boundaries, filtered through a child's limited understanding, made me sound petty and vindictive rather than self-protective. "Alice, I'm not mad at your family. But I am learning to make choices about how I spend my time and money, just like your parents make choices about how they spend theirs. Are you mad at me?" Alice's voice was so small, so worried, that I could picture her curled up somewhere private, using her phone secretly to call me. "Oh, honey, no. I could never be mad at you. You're one of my favorite people in the whole world. Then why can't I see you anymore?" The question broke my heart because it revealed how my new boundaries were being presented to the children. Instead of explaining that Grandma had her own life and activities, they were apparently being told that Grandma was withdrawing from family relationships. "Alice, you can always see me. But maybe we need to make our own plans instead of waiting for your parents to include me in theirs. Would you like to have a special grandmother-granddaughter day, just the two of us?" The excitement in Alice's voice was immediate and genuine. "Really? Just us? What would we do?" "Whatever you'd like to do. We could go to a museum, or the zoo, or a movie. We could have lunch at a fancy restaurant and pretend we're sophisticated ladies. We could go shopping for something special that you choose." The possibilities energized Alice in a way that family gatherings clearly didn't. The promise of individual attention, of activities chosen for her preferences rather than family dynamics, was appealing to a child who was often overlooked in the complexity of adult relationships. "When can we do it?" Alice asked. "When I get back from my train trip, we'll plan something special. But Alice, this needs to be something your parents agree to, okay? I don't want you to get in trouble for making plans without their permission." We talked for a few more minutes about the train trip, about the places I would see and the adventures I was planning. Alice's enthusiasm for my solo travels was genuine and infectious, untainted by the adults' concern about my independence and boundaries. After we hung up, I realized that my relationship with Alice didn't have to be compromised by my changing relationship with her parents. She was old enough to understand that people could care about each other without agreeing about everything, mature enough to appreciate individual attention that didn't depend on group dynamics. The train trip was everything I had hoped it would be and more. The roomette was small but comfortable, with a fold-down bed and a large window that showcased the changing landscape as we traveled west. I spent hours watching farmland give way to plains, plains rise into foothills, foothills transform into the dramatic peaks of the Colorado Rockies. The dining car conversations with fellow travelers were fascinating, connecting me with people from different backgrounds and life experiences who were taking the train for their own reasons and their own adventures. A retired teacher from Vermont heading to visit her son in California. A young couple celebrating their first anniversary with a cross-country honeymoon. An elderly man fulfilling a lifelong dream of seeing the Pacific Ocean by train. None of them knew my family history or my relationship struggles. To them, I was simply Margaret, a woman traveling alone by choice, someone confident and independent enough to undertake a cross-country journey for her own pleasure. The identity was liberating, reminding me of who I was beyond my roles as mother and grandmother and family financier. In California, I stayed with my college friend Janet in her small apartment near the ocean in Half Moon Bay. We hadn't seen each other in 15 years, but the friendship picked up easily, enhanced by the shared understanding that comes with 7 decades of life experience. Janet was also a widow, also dealing with the challenges of aging and family relationships, but she had maintained her independence more successfully than I had. She volunteered at a local animal shelter, took art classes at the community college, traveled regularly with a group of women friends who called themselves the Wild Roses. The secret, she told me over dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Pacific, is remembering that your life doesn't end when your children grow up. It just changes direction. We talked about our families, our sacrifices and disappointments, our struggles to maintain relationships with adult children who seemed to value us primarily for what we could provide rather than who we were as people. I stopped being the family bank about 5 years ago, Janet said cheerfully. It was hard at first because they were so used to having me solve their financial problems. But eventually they learned to solve their own problems, and our relationships actually improved because they weren't based on money anymore. The possibility that my relationships with Michael and Sandra might eventually improve rather than deteriorate was something I hadn't considered. I had been so focused on the immediate conflict that I hadn't thought about potential long-term benefits. What if they don't adjust? I asked. What if they decide I'm not worth maintaining a relationship with if I'm not useful to them? Janet's smile was sad but wise. Then you'll know where you really stood in their priorities. And you'll also know that you're better off without relationships that were based on exploitation rather than love. It was a hard truth, but a necessary one. If my value to my family was entirely instrumental, then protecting myself from exploitation might mean losing access to them entirely. But losing exploitative relationships wasn't really a loss, it was a liberation that made space for healthier connections. The week in California was restorative in ways I hadn't anticipated. I walked on beaches, visited art galleries, took photographs of sunsets over the Pacific. I read books without interruption, had conversations that centered my interests rather than other people's needs, made choices about my time and activities that prioritized my own pleasure. Most importantly, I proved to myself that I could be happy alone, that my well-being didn't depend on family approval or inclusion, that I was interesting and capable and worthy of beautiful experiences even when no one else was benefiting from them. The train trip back to Chicago gave me 3 days to process the changes in my perspective and prepare for whatever family dynamics awaited me at home. I felt calmer and more centered than I had in years, clear about my boundaries and confident in my right to maintain them. When I returned to Brooklyn, I found 17 voicemail messages from various family members, ranging from Michael's worried inquiries about my safety to Sandra's angry demands that I call back immediately to discuss family business. I didn't return the calls immediately. Instead, I spent the evening unpacking and sorting through the photographs from my trip, creating a visual record of adventures I had chosen and experiences I had valued enough to preserve. The next morning, I called Alice first. "Grandma, you're back. How was your trip? Did you see everything you wanted to see?" Alice's enthusiasm was unqualified and infectious, untainted by the adult's complicated feelings about my independence. "It was wonderful, sweetheart. I saw mountains and deserts and the ocean. I met interesting people and had amazing adventures. And the whole time, I was thinking about our special day and all the things we could do together." We made plans for the following Saturday, a full day of activities chosen specifically for Alice's interests. We would start with the Children's Museum, have lunch at a restaurant where she could order anything she wanted, then spend the afternoon at a bookstore where she could choose new books for her collection. "Just us?" Alice asked, as if she couldn't quite believe that adult attention would be focused entirely on her preferences. "Just us," I confirmed. "A whole day that's all about what you want to do." After talking to Alice, I called Michael, prepared for the more complicated conversation that awaited. "Mom, thank God you're back. We've been worried sick. You can't just disappear for 2 weeks without staying in touch." The accusation was unfair. I had sent postcards from several stops along the route and had texted photographs of significant moments. I had been in touch, I just hadn't been available for consultation about their decisions and problems. "I wasn't missing, Michael. I was traveling. There's a difference. But you didn't answer our calls. We had no way to reach you when we needed to discuss important family matters." Important family matters. More requests for money or services, more attempts to restore the previous dynamic where my resources were available on demand for their needs. What family matters needed to be discussed while I was on vacation? Michael's response revealed the true source of his frustration. "Well, Sandra's been trying to reach you about the Seattle move. The company extended the deadline for Michael's response, so we have another chance to make this work if you reconsider your position on helping with expenses." Helping with expenses. Still the euphemism for my money, still the assumption that my refusal was temporary rather than permanent, still the expectation that family pressure would eventually override my personal boundaries. "My position hasn't changed," I said calmly. "I won't be funding your relocation. But Mom, this could be our last chance. The promotion won't be available again for years. If we don't take this opportunity now, Michael's career could stagnate." The urgency was manufactured, the crisis artificially created to pressure me into immediate compliance. But the train trip had reinforced my understanding that their poor planning didn't constitute my emergency, that their opportunities didn't automatically become my obligations. Then you'll need to find another solution, I said without guilt or apology. The conversation continued with increasingly desperate attempts to change my mind, culminating in Michael's frustrated accusation that I had become selfish and uncaring since my mountain trip. "Mom, I don't recognize you anymore. You used to care about family, used to want to help when we needed you. Now you're off taking expensive trips while we struggle with real problems." The characterization of my train trip as expensive frivolity while their relocation was a real problem revealed how differently we viewed priorities and needs. My desire for travel and adventure was selfish indulgence, their desire for career advancement was legitimate necessity. But I had learned to reject guilt about spending my own money on my own priorities, just as they felt no guilt about spending their money on theirs. "Michael, I do care about family. But caring doesn't mean sacrificing my financial security for your career opportunities. There's a difference between helping and enabling." The distinction was crucial but apparently incomprehensible to someone who had grown accustomed to external funding for major life decisions. The conversation ended without resolution but with clarity. Michael was disappointed in my new boundaries, I was disappointed in his inability to understand them. We both recognized that our relationship had changed in fundamental ways that couldn't be easily reversed. That evening, Sandra called with a more direct approach. "Margaret, I'm going to be honest with you. Michael's very hurt by your refusal to help with the Seattle move. He feels like you don't care about his success or his family's future." The emotional manipulation was sophisticated, my financial boundaries were being reframed as personal rejection, my self-protection as selfishness that hurt people I claimed to love. "I'm sorry Michael is hurt," I said sincerely. "But his hurt doesn't change my decision." "Why are you doing this?" Sandra asked, her frustration finally erupting into direct confrontation. "Why are you suddenly being so difficult about family requests? We're not asking you to do anything you can't afford." The question revealed her fundamental misunderstanding of both my motivations and my financial situation. She saw my refusal as arbitrary difficulty rather than necessary self-protection. "Sandra, I'm not being difficult. I'm being careful with my resources so I can maintain my independence and security. You're asking me to risk my financial future for your immediate convenience." "Your financial future?" Sandra's laugh was harsh and dismissive. "Margaret, you're 72 years old. How much future do you really need to plan for?" The cruelty of the statement took my breath away. Not because Sandra wished me ill, but because she genuinely couldn't understand why someone my age would need to preserve assets for their remaining years. In her mind, my advanced age made my financial concerns less legitimate rather than more urgent, made my need for security less important rather than more crucial. "I hope to live for quite a few more years," I said quietly. "And I intend to live them with dignity and independence, which requires careful financial planning. But you're already living modestly. You have everything you need. Why hoard money that could help your family create better opportunities?" Hoarding money. As if saving for my own needs was miserly behavior rather than responsible planning, as if my careful financial management was somehow selfish when it could be directed toward their benefit. The conversation revealed the depth of Sandra's sense of entitlement to my resources and her inability to understand my changing priorities. In her worldview, my money existed primarily for their benefit, and my refusal to share it was incomprehensibly selfish. But the train trip had reinforced my understanding that my resources belonged to me, that I had the right to preserve them for my own use, that generosity should be chosen rather than expected. The call ended with Sandra's frustrated assertion that my new attitude was destroying family relationships and that I would regret prioritizing money over love. But I wasn't prioritizing money over love, I was recognizing that relationships based primarily on financial transactions weren't really love at all. The next few weeks brought a noticeable chill in family communications. Phone calls became less frequent, invitations stopped arriving, updates about grandchildren's activities were no longer shared. The family had apparently decided that if I wouldn't fulfill my traditional role as family financier, I wasn't worth maintaining regular contact with. The silence hurt, but it was also clarifying. It proved that my value to them had been primarily instrumental, that my presence was tolerated rather than welcomed when it didn't come with financial benefits. But the silence also created space for different kinds of relationships to develop. My Saturday with Alice was everything I had hoped it would be. She was delighted by the undivided attention, thrilled to have her preferences prioritized, excited to explore museum exhibits and choose books and order whatever she wanted for lunch. "Grandma, this is the best day ever," she said as we sat in a cafe eating ice cream sundaes that definitely qualified as spoiling behavior. "It's one of my best days too," I said truthfully. Alice's company was genuinely delightful when it wasn't filtered through family dynamics and competing priorities. She was curious and funny and affectionate in ways that reminded me why I had wanted to be a grandmother in the first place. "Can we do this again?" Alice asked as I drove her home that evening. "As often as your parents will allow it," I promised. When I dropped Alice at her house, Sandra was waiting in the doorway with barely concealed irritation. "Alice, go inside and start your homework," she said immediately, clearly not wanting her daughter to hear whatever conversation was about to follow. After Alice disappeared into the house, Sandra turned to me with the kind of controlled anger that indicated a prepared speech. "Margaret, I need you to understand that these individual outings with Alice aren't appropriate. She's part of a family unit, and family activities should include the whole family." The objection was revealing. My one-on-one time with my granddaughter was somehow threatening to Sandra's control over family dynamics, problematic because it bypassed parental mediation of our relationship. "Alice seemed to enjoy our time together," I said mildly. "That's not the point. The point is that you're undermining family structure by creating special relationships that exclude her parents and siblings. It's confusing for her and disruptive for everyone else." Undermining family structure. As if my individual relationship with Alice was somehow subversive rather than natural, as if grandparent-grandchild bonds needed to be filtered through parental approval to be legitimate. "Sandra, Alice is my granddaughter. I don't need permission to spend time with her." "Actually, you do," Sandra said with cold authority. "She's a minor child, and her parents have the right to determine who she spends time with and under what circumstances." The threat was clear. If I continued to prioritize individual relationships over family group dynamics, I could be denied access to Alice altogether. But the mountain trip and the train journey had taught me that threats lose their power when you're no longer afraid of independence, when you understand that bad relationships can't be improved by capitulation to unreasonable demands. "That's your choice to make," I said calmly. "But it would be a sad choice for Alice." I left Sandra standing in her doorway, probably shocked that her ultimatum hadn't achieved immediate compliance. I drove home feeling sad but not defeated, disappointed but not desperate. If maintaining my boundaries meant losing access to my grandchildren, that was painful but not catastrophic. I couldn't protect my relationship with Alice by sacrificing my self-respect and financial security to please her parents. The final confrontation came in early January, 3 months after the mountain trip that had started my journey toward independence and self-protection. Michael called on a Tuesday morning, his voice heavy with the kind of dramatic disappointment that indicated a prepared emotional appeal. "Mom, I wanted to let you know that Sandra and I have made some decisions about family relationships going forward." Decisions about family relationships. As if my membership in the family was subject to their approval, as if my status as Michael's mother was conditional on my compliance with their expectations. "I'm listening," I said, preparing myself for whatever ultimatum was coming. "We've decided that if you're not going to participate in family life the way you used to, then maybe it's better if we create some distance. The children are confused by your new attitude, and Sandra feels uncomfortable not knowing whether she can count on your support when we need it." The logic was twisted but revealing. Because I had established boundaries around my time and money, they were choosing to end regular contact rather than adjust to my new expectations of reciprocal respect. "What does that mean, practically?" I asked. "It means we won't be including you in family gatherings unless you're prepared to contribute the way you used to. It means we can't maintain close relationships with someone who puts their own preferences ahead of family needs." The conditional love was finally stated explicitly. I could be part of their family if I resumed my role as financier and service provider, but not if I expected to be valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. "Michael, do you hear what you're saying? You're telling me that my relationship with you and my grandchildren is conditional on my willingness to give you money and services without expecting anything in return." The stark statement of their position apparently made Michael uncomfortable, because his response was defensive rather than acknowledging. "That's not fair, Mom. We're not asking for money and services without giving anything back. We include you in our lives, we let you spend time with the grandchildren, we invite you to family events." Let me spend time with my grandchildren. Invite me to family events that I pay for. Include me in lives that I financially support. The reciprocity was entirely one-sided, entirely based on my gratitude for access rather than their appreciation for my contributions. "Michael, those aren't gifts you're giving me. Those are normal family relationships that shouldn't depend on my financial contributions." The silence that followed was profound, as if Michael was finally hearing the implications of his own words and recognizing how transactional our relationship had become. "I don't know what you want from me, Mom," he said finally, sounding genuinely confused. "I want you to value me for who I am, not what I can provide. I want family relationships based on love and respect rather than money and services. I want to be included because you enjoy my company, not because I pay for activities." The request was simple but apparently impossible for Michael to understand or fulfill. "But you do pay for activities," he said, as if that fact made love-based inclusion unrealistic. "And you do provide services. That's part of who you are in our family, part of who I was in their family. Not a beloved mother and grandmother whose presence added joy and meaning to gatherings, but a functional provider whose contributions enabled their lifestyle and activities." The conversation continued without resolution because we were operating from fundamentally different assumptions about what family relationships should be. Michael expected continued financial and service support with occasional inclusion as sufficient reciprocity. I wanted mutual respect and genuine affection regardless of financial transactions. The call ended with Michael's disappointed assertion that my new attitude had destroyed our family unity and that I was choosing selfishness over love. But I wasn't choosing selfishness over love, I was choosing self-respect over exploitation. That evening, I sat in my Brooklyn apartment looking through the photographs from my train trip, remembering the peace and joy I had felt traveling alone, making my own choices, experiencing beauty that no one could assign or withhold. The images reminded me that I was complete in myself, that my worth wasn't determined by other people's assessments, that I could create meaningful experiences and feel genuine happiness without family approval. I had lost the family relationships I had thought I was maintaining, but I had gained something more precious: the understanding that I deserved to be valued for who I was rather than what I could provide. 3 months later, I was living a different life. The silence from Michael and Sandra had continued, occasionally broken by brief, formal communications about practical matters but empty of the warmth or inclusion that had characterized our previous interactions. I missed Alice terribly, but I refused to sacrifice my boundaries to regain supervised access to my granddaughter. If her parents chose to use her as leverage in our dispute, that was their decision and their responsibility. Instead of waiting for family inclusion, I began creating my own community and pursuing my own interests with the energy I had previously devoted to managing other people's needs. I joined a photography class at the community college, learning to use my digital camera more skillfully and discovering that I had a genuine talent for capturing street scenes and architectural details. I volunteered at a literacy program for adult learners, helping immigrants and high school dropouts develop reading skills that would improve their job prospects and life opportunities. The work was meaningful in ways that cooking family dinners had never been, creating connections based on shared goals rather than assumed obligations. I started attending lectures at the Brooklyn Museum and films at the Repertory Theater, cultural activities I had always meant to pursue but had never prioritized when family needs dominated my schedule. Most surprisingly, I began developing friendships with other women my age who were also navigating the challenges of maintaining independence and dignity in relationships with adult children who seemed to value them primarily for their services. Through the photography class, I met Eleanor, a widow whose daughter expected unlimited babysitting and emotional support but rarely offered genuine companionship in return. Through the literacy program, I connected with Rose, whose son called primarily when he needed money and rarely showed interest in her thoughts or experiences. Through the museum lectures, I encountered Dorothy, whose grandchildren knew her primarily as someone who provided birthday presents and holiday meals but had never asked about her own childhood or life experiences. We were all women who had given generously of ourselves for decades, who had prioritized family needs over personal desires, who had discovered in our later years that love based primarily on service wasn't satisfying or sustainable. Together, we began creating the kinds of relationships we had wanted with family but had never quite achieved: reciprocal connections based on mutual interest and genuine affection, friendships that valued our thoughts and experiences rather than just our contributions. We took turns hosting dinner parties where conversation focused on books and politics and travel dreams rather than other people's problems and needs. We planned group activities like museum visits and theater outings and weekend trips that prioritized our own interests rather than accommodating someone else's schedule. We supported each other through difficult decisions about family boundaries and celebrated each other's steps toward independence and self-advocacy. The community we created was everything I had hoped family relationships would be: nurturing without being exploitative, supportive without being conditional, loving without being transactional. 6 months after the final confrontation with Michael and Sandra, I received an unexpected phone call. "Grandma? It's Alice. I'm calling from Emma's phone because Mom took mine away." Alice's voice was small and worried, the way children sound when they're breaking rules but feel they have no choice. "Alice, sweetheart, how are you? I've missed you so much." "I've missed you too. Grandma, why don't you come to family things anymore? Mom says you don't want to spend time with us." The question broke my heart because it revealed how my absence had been explained to the children, as rejection rather than rejection of unreasonable conditions, as loss of love rather than refusal to accept exploitation. "Oh, Alice, I want to spend time with you more than anything. But your parents have decided that I can only be included in family activities if I do things I don't think are right for me. What things? How do you explain financial manipulation and emotional exploitation to a 10-year-old? How do you help a child understand that love shouldn't be conditional on services provided? It's complicated, sweetheart. But it's not because I don't love you or don't want to see you. Could I come visit you sometime? Just me? Like we did that day at the museum. The hope in Alice's voice was heartbreaking and encouraging at the same time. She remembered our solo adventure fondly, still wanted the kind of individual relationship that her parents had forbidden. I would love that, Alice. But it would need to be something your parents agree to. I'll ask them, Alice said with 10-year-old determination. I'll tell them I really want to see you. After Alice hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling the familiar mixture of joy and sadness that came with family contact. Joy because Alice still wanted a relationship with me, sadness because that relationship was being held hostage to her parents' demands for my compliance with their expectations. But something had changed in the months since I had established my boundaries. The sadness was manageable now, not the devastating loneliness I had felt when family approval was my primary source of validation. I had other relationships, other activities, other sources of meaning and connection. My life was full and satisfying even without the family inclusion I had once thought was essential for happiness. 2 weeks later, Sandra called with a tone that indicated a significant shift in family dynamics. Margaret, Alice has been asking constantly about visiting you. She's been persistent to the point of being disruptive about family activities. Alice's lobbying had apparently been effective enough to create problems for Sandra, forcing her to address the situation she had created by isolating me from the grandchildren. She called me a couple of weeks ago, I said neutrally. She sounds like she's doing well. She's not doing well, Sandra said with frustration. She's constantly asking why you don't come to family things anymore, why she can't see you, why everything changed. It's causing problems with family dynamics. Problems with family dynamics. The same concern Sandra had raised about my individual relationship with Alice, now applied to the consequences of cutting off that relationship entirely. What would you like me to do about that? I asked. The question forced Sandra to acknowledge that she was calling because she needed something from me, not because she was offering something to me. We were thinking maybe you could have occasional visits with Alice. Supervised visits, at our house, when it's convenient for our schedule. Supervised visits. As if I were a potentially dangerous influence who couldn't be trusted alone with my own granddaughter, as if my desire for individual time with Alice was somehow suspicious. That's not what Alice wants, I said calmly. She wants the kind of individual time we had before, the kind of relationship where she has my full attention and can choose activities she enjoys. Well, that's not practical given the current situation. This is the option we're prepared to offer. The ultimatum was clear: accept supervised visits under their conditions, or continue to have no contact with Alice at all. But the months of independence had taught me that accepting bad terms doesn't improve relationships, it just enables continued exploitation. That's not an option I'm interested in, I said without anger or negotiation. Sandra's response revealed her shock that I would refuse access to Alice rather than accept her conditions. Margaret, you're being unreasonable. We're trying to find a compromise that works for everyone. No, Sandra, you're trying to find an arrangement that maintains your control while appearing generous. That's not compromise, that's manipulation. The conversation ended with Sandra's frustrated assertion that I was being stubborn and that my refusal to accept their terms proved I didn't really care about Alice. But I cared about Alice too much to model acceptance of disrespectful treatment, too much to show her that love meant tolerating exploitation, too much to teach her that family relationships were based on power and control rather than mutual respect. The next morning, I wrote Alice a letter. Dear Alice, I began, I want you to know that I love you and miss you every single day. I think about you when I see interesting things on my walks, when I read books I think you might enjoy, when I take photographs I wish I could show you. I know you don't understand why I don't come to family gatherings anymore, and I wish I could explain it in a way that would make sense to someone your age. The simple answer is that your parents and I disagree about how family members should treat each other. I believe family relationships should be based on love and respect and choice. I believe people should want to spend time together because they enjoy each other's company, not because they need something from each other. Your parents believe different things about how families should work, and right now, those differences mean we can't find a way to spend time together that everyone feels good about. This is not your fault, and it doesn't mean I love you any less. You are one of the most important people in my life, and nothing will ever change that. I hope someday we'll find a way to have the kind of relationship we both want. Until then, know that you are always in my heart and that I am proud to be your grandmother. I mailed the letter along with a photograph from my train trip, a picture of the Pacific Ocean taken from the beach where I had walked with my friend Janet. On the back, I wrote, thinking of you and sending love from California. I didn't know if Alice would receive the letter or if her parents would intercept it, but I needed to communicate my love directly rather than hoping Sandra would accurately convey my feelings. A month later, I received an unexpected visitor. I was working in my small kitchen, preparing dinner for Dorothy and Eleanor, who were coming over to help plan our next group outing, when the building's buzzer rang. "Margaret? It's Michael. Can I come up?" My son's voice through the intercom was hesitant, uncertain, nothing like the confident authority he had wielded during our previous confrontations. I buzzed him up and waited by my apartment door, wondering what crisis or need had brought him to my home after months of silence. Michael looked tired when he reached my floor, older than his 45 years, carrying the weight of stress that comes with trying to manage too many competing pressures. "Hi, Mom. Thanks for letting me come up." We stood in my doorway looking at each other across months of hurt and misunderstanding, both uncertain how to navigate this unexpected reunion. "Come in," I said, leading him to my small living room where the photographs from my train trip were now displayed on the walls alongside my recent photography class projects. Michael looked around the apartment with surprise, as if he was seeing it for the first time. And in many ways, he was. The space I had previously kept carefully neutral, decorated for other people's comfort rather than my own preferences, now reflected my personality and interests. "It looks different in here," he said, examining a photograph I had taken of the Brooklyn Bridge at sunset. "I've made some changes," I said simply. We sat in my two comfortable chairs, the ones I had recently reupholstered in fabric I loved rather than the practical beige that had previously dominated my decorating choices. "Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking since our last conversation. About what you said, about family relationships and money and other things." Michael's voice was careful, as if he was testing each word before speaking it, trying to find language that wouldn't trigger another argument. "I'm listening," I said, offering him the same invitation he had rarely extended to me. "I think maybe I haven't been fair to you. About expectations, about taking your help for granted." The admission was tentative but significant, acknowledging what I had been trying to explain for months. "What made you think about that?" I asked with genuine curiosity. Michael was quiet for a long moment, looking out my window at the Brooklyn street where children were playing and neighbors were coming home from work. "Alice, mostly. She's been difficult since you stopped coming to family things. Not badly behaved, but sad. Asking questions we don't know how to answer." "What kinds of questions?" "Why you don't love us anymore. Why family isn't important to you. Why money is more important than spending time together." The questions revealed how my boundaries had been explained to Alice, how my insistence on respect had been translated into rejection and materialism. "What did you tell her?" I asked. "At first, we told her you were going through a difficult time, that you needed space to figure some things out. But she kept asking, and eventually Sandra told her you had decided your money was more important than family relationships." The characterization was predictable but painful, reducing my complex struggle for respect and dignity to simple greed and selfishness. "And what do you think now?" I asked. Michael was quiet again, working through thoughts that were clearly difficult for him to organize and express. "I think maybe we did expect too much from you. Not just money, but also availability, services. Things we should have been doing ourselves or arranging ourselves." The acknowledgement was more than I had expected, more honest than Michael had been willing to be during our previous conversations. "And I think maybe we didn't appreciate what you were giving us, didn't treat it like the gift it was supposed to be." "It was a gift," I said quietly. "Money I gave freely out of love, services I provided because I wanted to help. But gifts shouldn't be expected or demanded. They should be chosen by the giver and appreciated by the receiver." Michael nodded slowly, as if he was finally understanding distinctions that had been obvious to me for months. "Mom, would you be willing to try again? To find a way to have family relationships that work better for everyone?" The request was more humble than anything I had heard from Michael in years, but I had learned to be cautious about family promises that weren't supported by changed behavior. "What would that look like?" I asked. "I don't know exactly. But maybe starting with spending time together without any expectations about money or services. Maybe just being family without the other stuff." "And Sandra? How does she feel about trying again?" Michael's hesitation told me that Sandra was not the driving force behind this reconciliation attempt. "Sandra is adjusting to some new realities. We didn't get the Seattle promotion, so we're staying in New Jersey for the foreseeable future. And some of our other financial plans haven't worked out the way we hoped. Financial plans that had depended on my contributions, dreams that had been built on assumptions about my continued support." "I'm sorry about the promotion," I said sincerely. "Yeah, well, maybe it wasn't the right time anyway. Maybe we were trying to move too fast, reach too far without having the foundation we needed." The metaphor was apt, they had been trying to build their future on my financial foundation rather than their own resources and efforts. "Michael, I'd be willing to try having family relationships that don't depend on money," I said carefully. "But it would have to be genuine change, not just temporary adjustment until you find another way to get what you need from me." "I understand that. And I think I finally understand what you were trying to tell me before. About feeling used instead of loved." The acknowledgement was worth more than any apology, recognition that my hurt had been legitimate rather than oversensitive. We talked for another hour about possibilities for rebuilding our relationship, about ways to include me in family activities that weren't based on my financial contributions, about creating space for individual relationships with grandchildren that didn't threaten family dynamics. When Michael left, we each felt more hopeful than we had in months, but also realistic about the challenges of changing patterns that had been years in the making. The rebuilding process was slow and sometimes awkward, marked by tentative invitations and careful conversations that avoided the topics which had previously caused conflict. Sandra remained distant but civil, clearly not enthusiastic about the reconciliation but apparently willing to tolerate my presence if it meant less disruption from Alice's persistent questions about my absence. The first family gathering I attended in 6 months was Emma's 13th birthday party, held at their house on a Sunday afternoon in May. I arrived with a thoughtful gift I had chosen based on Emma's interests rather than its price tag, prepared to contribute conversation and celebration rather than funding or labor. The dynamic was noticeably different from previous gatherings. Sandra directed questions to me about my photography class and volunteer work, showing polite interest in activities that didn't involve serving family needs. Michael made a point of including me in conversations about current events and neighborhood changes, treating me like someone whose opinions were worth hearing rather than just someone whose services were useful. Most importantly, Alice attached herself to my side immediately, chattering about school projects and friend drama and books she had been reading, filling me in on months of her life that I had missed. "Grandma, I got your letter," she whispered during a quiet moment. "I kept it in my special box. Will you write me more letters?" "I'd love to," I whispered back. "Maybe you could write me letters too." The idea of regular correspondence with Alice, communication that belonged to us rather than being filtered through parental mediation, was appealing to both of us. The birthday party passed without tension or conflict, marked by genuine conversation and shared laughter rather than the undertone of resentment and exploitation that had characterized previous family gatherings. When I left that evening, I felt cautiously optimistic about the possibility of rebuilding family relationships on healthier terms. Over the following months, the changes deepened and became more consistent. Michael began calling occasionally just to check in, asking about my activities and sharing updates about work and family that weren't related to requests or crises. Alice and I established a correspondence routine, writing each other letters about books and photography and travel dreams, creating a relationship that was entirely ours. Sandra slowly began treating me like a person rather than a function, asking my opinions on topics ranging from Alice's school choices to neighborhood restaurant recommendations. Most significantly, family gatherings became reciprocal rather than one-sided. I was invited to contribute presence and participation rather than funding and labor. They expressed genuine appreciation for my company rather than just my services. For Thanksgiving, instead of assuming I would host and fund the entire celebration, Sandra suggested we have dinner at their house with everyone contributing part of the meal. I brought my famous apple pie and helped with food preparation, but as a participant rather than the designated cook, enjoying conversation and connection instead of managing everyone else's needs. The difference was profound and healing, demonstrating that family relationships could be based on mutual affection rather than transactional exchanges. But the most meaningful change was internal. I no longer waited for family approval to make decisions about my time and money, no longer assumed that their needs were automatically more important than mine, no longer accepted inclusion on terms that required me to diminish myself. I had learned to value my own company and create my own meaning, which paradoxically made me better company for others and more genuinely present in relationships that were reciprocal rather than exploitative. A year after the mountain trip that had catalyzed my transformation, I planned another family vacation. But this time, the planning process was collaborative rather than assumptive. Instead of researching and booking and paying for everything myself, then hoping for gratitude and inclusion, I proposed the idea and invited everyone to participate in making decisions about destination and activities and expenses. "I've been thinking about planning a family trip for next summer," I said during one of our regular Sunday dinners. "Somewhere we've never been together, somewhere that would offer activities everyone would enjoy." Alice immediately became excited, suggesting possibilities ranging from Disney World to European river cruises, her enthusiasm untainted by the financial and logistical concerns that shaped adult travel planning. "Where were you thinking, Mom?" Michael asked, no longer assuming that my ideas were automatically less important than their preferences. I was hoping we could decide together. Maybe everyone could research some options and we could choose based on what appeals to most of us. Sandra surprised me by offering to coordinate the research process, assigning different family members to investigate various destinations and create presentations about possibilities and costs. Over the following weeks, we held family meetings to discuss options and narrow down choices, with everyone's input weighted equally rather than defaulting to whoever was paying for the trip. The process was more complex than my previous approach of making all decisions myself, but it was also more engaging and democratic, creating shared investment in the outcome rather than leaving me responsible for everyone's satisfaction. We eventually chose a week in a large rental house near Yellowstone National Park, with activities ranging from wildlife viewing and hiking to hot springs and historic site visits. But most importantly, we chose it together, with equal enthusiasm from all family members and a financial arrangement that reflected everyone's ability to contribute rather than placing the entire burden on me. I paid for my portion of the expenses and contributed what I could comfortably afford toward family activities, but as a generous contribution rather than an assumed obligation. The trip itself was everything I had hoped our mountain vacation would be: genuine togetherness rather than parallel activities, shared experiences that created memories for all of us, conversations that included everyone's perspectives rather than just accommodating certain family members' preferences. Alice and I hiked together to waterfalls and photographed wildlife, building on our individual relationship while including her parents and siblings rather than excluding them. Sandra and I discovered shared interests in reading and gardening, developing a friendship that existed independently of her relationship with Michael or my role as his mother. Michael and I talked about his career goals and my retirement dreams, sharing perspectives on life changes and future hopes without either of us needing to fix or fund the other's challenges. Most importantly, all of us felt valued for who we were rather than what we could provide, creating authentic connections based on genuine affection rather than transactional exchanges. The vacation was successful not because everything went perfectly, but because problems were shared rather than dumped on me, decisions were collaborative rather than assumptive, and appreciation was expressed rather than expected. On our last evening in Wyoming, as we sat around the fire pit outside our rental house, Alice asked me a question that revealed how much our family dynamics had changed. "Grandma, what was your favorite part of this trip?" The question itself was significant because it assumed my experience mattered, that my preferences were worth knowing rather than unimportant compared to everyone else's satisfaction. "My favorite part," I said, looking around the fire at faces that were relaxed and content rather than stressed or demanding, "was feeling like we were all here because we wanted to be with each other, not because we needed something from each other." Alice nodded seriously, as if she understood exactly what I meant despite being only 11 years old. "That's my favorite part too," she said. The validation from my granddaughter, the recognition that she had felt the difference in our family dynamics as profoundly as I had, made all the difficult months of boundary setting and relationship rebuilding worthwhile. I sat by that fire in Wyoming feeling something I hadn't experienced in years: completely included rather than marginally tolerated, valued for my presence rather than my contributions, loved for who I was rather than what I could provide. It was exactly what I had been seeking when I demanded a room with a view, exactly the respect and affection I had thought was impossible to achieve without sacrificing my own needs and boundaries. Now, 2 years after that transformative mountain trip, I live a life that feels completely different from the one I was living before. My relationships with Michael and Sandra have stabilized into reciprocal friendship based on genuine mutual interest and respect rather than one-sided provision of services and funding. My relationship with Alice has deepened into the kind of grandmother-granddaughter bond one had always hoped for, built on shared interests and individual attention rather than supervised visits and controlled access. My relationships with Emma and Jake are developing naturally as they get older and become more interested in my experiences and perspectives, creating connections based on authentic affection rather than obligation. But perhaps most importantly, my relationship with myself has been transformed. I no longer define my worth by how much I can give to others or how grateful they are for my contributions. I no longer measure love by how much I can sacrifice or how much others need me. I no longer accept inclusion that comes with conditions that diminish my dignity or respect. Instead, I prioritize my own well-being and happiness, understanding that taking care of myself is not selfish but necessary for authentic relationships with others. I pursue my own interests and maintain my own friendships, recognizing that a full and satisfying life doesn't depend on family approval or inclusion. I give generously when I choose to give, but only when generosity is genuinely appreciated rather than automatically expected. The photography I started during those months of family estrangement has become a passion that brings me joy and connects me with other creative people who value my artistic vision. The volunteer work I began as an alternative to family service has evolved into genuine commitment to literacy education that utilizes my skills in meaningful ways. The friendships I developed with other women navigating similar family challenges have become a chosen family that provides support and companionship without exploitation or manipulation. The travel I prioritized over family funding requests has expanded my world and reminded me that adventure and beauty are available at every age to those who are willing to pursue them. I live now with the confidence that comes from knowing I can be happy alone, which makes me better company when I choose to be with others. I give now from abundance rather than depletion, which makes my gifts more valuable and more appreciated. I love now without losing myself, which makes my love more genuine and more sustainable. The lesson I've learned, and the one I want to share with anyone who recognizes their own story in mine, is both simple and revolutionary. You deserve to be valued for who you are, not what you can provide. You deserve relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection, not one-sided giving disguised as love. You deserve to prioritize your own well-being without feeling guilty about being selfish. You deserve a room with a view, literally and metaphorically, in every relationship and situation that claims to value your presence. Most importantly, you deserve to stand up for yourself even when standing up means standing alone, because dignity and self-respect are worth more than acceptance that comes at the cost of your own diminishment. The truth is, when you stop accepting less than you deserve, you often discover that you can have more than you ever imagined possible. When you stop trying to buy love through sacrifice and service, you create space for genuine affection based on who you are rather than what you provide. When you stop being afraid of being alone, you become someone others actually want to spend time with. The mountain cabin where Sandra told me I didn't deserve a room with a view has become a symbol in my mind, not of rejection and cruelty, but of the moment I decided to stop accepting other people's assessments of my worth. I did deserve a room with a view. I deserved it then, and I deserve it now, and I will never again let anyone convince me otherwise. The view from where I sit today, in my Brooklyn apartment surrounded by photographs of places I've seen and friends I've made and family members who genuinely value my company, is more beautiful than any mountain vista. It's the view of a life lived with dignity and purpose, a life where love is given and received freely rather than bought and sold, a life where family relationships enhance rather than diminish the people involved in them. Have you ever lived, or known someone who lived, something like this? Have you ever felt invisible in your own family, useful but not valued, included but not truly welcomed? Please, share your story in the comments. Your experience matters, and your voice deserves to be heard. If this story touched something in you, if it felt familiar or gave you courage or simply made you feel less alone, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps me find the strength to keep sharing these difficult truths, to keep opening my heart in hopes that someone who needs to hear these words will find them. Remember, you deserve a room with a view in every area of your life. Don't let anyone convince you to settle for less.